What is COVID-19? A virus is an ultramicroscopic infectious agent that replicates only within the cells of living hosts. There are a lot of them on Earth, a quadrillion or more. Some of these belong to a group known as coronaviruses, 7 of which can infect humans. COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by the most recently discovered coronavirus. Most people infected with COVID-19 will experience mild to moderate respiratory illness and recover without requiring special treatment. Older people and those with underlying medical problems like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, and cancer are more likely to develop serious illness. As of Halloween 2020, coronavirus disease has reportedly killed about 1.1 million people worldwide, though some people are as of yet unconvinced of its existence. How did we get here? In part through our incapacity for critical thinking. So what is critical thinking? It is not being a critic. It is not being critical in a negative sense. Thinking critically means exercising careful judgment or judicious evaluation. It means questioning our own beliefs to determine if they are justified and true. Most people misuse their thinking toolkit to find ways of confirming what they already believe to be the case. Critical thinking avoids this pitfall of confirmation bias. In thinking critically, we stop our mind fixating on whatever elements of experience confirm what we already know. We set bias aside and critically analyze the available data before forming our beliefs. The goal is to use the evidence in order to become right, not to prove that one was right all along. The quest is for truth and not about this or that gallant knight. It requires that most elusive and difficult of skills, listening, more than it does speaking, and enough humility to occasionally change one's mind. Recognizing we are wrong is no fun, to be sure, but it does make us better than we were yesterday. If we're never wrong, we're no better than we were 10 years ago. And we can be certain that we are bending reality to fit our mold, when it ought to be the other way around. So what does critical thinking have to do with COVID-19? Nothing more or less than it has to do with every other thing. It provides us with the tools we need to bring us closer to true beliefs, and so to making correct decisions. The more important the decision we have to make, the greater the need to think critically before making it. The decisions we are making now, to lock down or not lock down a country or a planet, to disrupt economies or halt industries or grant governments certain controls over the freedoms of its citizens, will have massive consequences to the lives of many of the world's people, and it could end a lot of them. These are decisions we need to get right, and if the field of critical thinking has a ready-made list of reasons why humans consistently make poor decisions, it would be careless not to consider it. Not in spite of the fact that people are dying, but because they are. It was around the start of 2020 when news began circulating widely that something worrisome was going on in the world. People were dying from a new virus, or a new version of an old virus. A coronavirus, the cause of our common cold, was killing people fast enough in the Chinese city of Wuhan to see a hospital built in 10 days. We might take for granted what we know about the virus today, but people had to figure this stuff out, quickly, while bodies mounted. The virus seemed to spread not only by contact between people, but by contact between people and things other people had touched hours before, a day before, several days before. People figured quickly that not everyone will get sick or die, but some people will. Best that we don't touch off each other as much as usual, or drink from the same cup, touch the same door handle, petrol pump, or anything until we see what the hell is going on, just how dangerous is this thing. We reasoned by analogy that it could be like the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, which reportedly killed somewhere between 20 million and 100 million people, out of 500 million or so infected. A 5 to 20% mortality rate, terrifying. People noted early that most of those dying with or because of COVID-19 were old, and rightly generalized that it is more dangerous to older people, to overweight people, to all kinds of underlying conditions. But even something as basic to human reasoning and communication as forming generalizations from particular instances is a minefield for error. When we forget that generalizations have exceptions, we misconstrue them as rules. So you are young, but this virus can kill you too. Jumping too quickly to generalizations is one of our most common mistakes. Just using words to designate classes of things, such as man or woman, leads us astray if we think of the classes themselves as immovable or all-encompassing. The words man and woman just don't cover everyone. All generalizations are dangerous, even this one. And if man and woman don't cover everyone, then right and wrong covers almost no one. It is true that 2 plus 2 will never make 5, but for the most part we can't carry truth around in our pockets. Our beliefs ought to exist upon a continuum of confidence. A child can be sure the yellow ball is bigger than the white marble if they hold them in their hands. The child cut out for critical thinking will be less sure that the sun is bigger than the moon. They might do well to trust their teacher on this fact. Some deference to the knowledge of expertise of others is warranted. Listening to a virologist's advice about a virus is warranted. But for the longest time, the world's greatest scientists thought that the earth was flat. In that instance, every rote-learning student was wrong, and the people who were right were the conspiracy theorists. Nothing fundamental has changed in the few intermitting years regarding human psychology or the nature of truth. Questions can still teach us more than answers, and doubt should be our starting point if we are to think for ourselves at all. It is not an accident that people with lower than average IQ overestimate their own IQ. People with higher IQs underestimate their IQs. Because to be smart is just to know that if a 12-year-old girl works for NASA doing superstring level mathematics, then the rest of us are just different degrees of stupid. And a higher IQ is as likely to make us wrong as it is to make us right. A higher IQ is better at making reality fit whatever it is you already think to be the case. You are more adept at seeing the flaws in other people's points of view, but not necessarily your own. IQ cannot save you from yourself. There are certain systematic errors of reason that just are a part of being human. Missteps our mind makes, cognitive biases. The bias blind spot is one. The bias blind spot is the curious phenomenon by which people can recognize the biases of all other humans and still be unable to infer that they may have such biases themselves. In one study published in Management Science, out of 661 participants, only one person stated that he or she was more biased than the average person. Out of 661, one. But we know that 330 of them were more biased than the average person, and so 329 of them were wrong. This doesn't mean that half of us are biased. We are all biased, but half of us are even more biased than the other half. So even though about 99.86% of humans doubt that the beliefs we cherish are but the detritus of our bumbling experience, our culture, our teachers, our parents, we are wrong. And the propaganda that so self-evidently determines the thoughts of others determines yours too. Another statistic that should shake your confidence is that approximately 99.9% of the media relating to the COVID-19 pandemic has been from unreputable sources. 99.9%. So we might remain open to the idea that we did not become expert virologists or epidemiologists in the last 2 weeks, and refrain from drawing fast, definitive conclusions. We need to think slowly. In cognitive psychology, there is a distinction made between System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 is more primitive. It literally evolved first and is common to many non-human animals. It also reacts faster to sensory input. It is your first process to respond. If you recoil in horror or jump out of the way of an oncoming car, you are engaging System 1 processes. When deciding your next move in chess, you are engaging System 2. You deliberate upon the move. You can think about thinking about it. And being scared or angry does not help me to make a better move. Chess is slow thinking, and slow thinking comes highly recommended. System 1, on the other hand, or fast thinking, is much closer to not thinking. It is tied to the amygdala, the little bit in the middle of your brain that evolved first, that helped tiny mammals avoid large dinosaurs. You too, being a mammal, are driven by these fight or flight response mechanisms. And System 1 does a good job insofar as you are avoiding dinosaurs or oncoming traffic, but it won't help you to deliberate upon intricate decisions. It cannot weigh evidence, consider possibilities, or lead you to the vast but elusive terrain between warring sides where truth resides and critical thinking happens. What System 1, System 2 thinking teaches us is that we are most likely to make poor decisions when we are scared. And right now, a lot of people are scared. We should anticipate some poor decision making then. Cognitive psychology has shown us that this is what happens. It always happens, not because anyone is stupid, but because they are mammals. The warring sides in this case might be characterized as anti-lockdown and pro-lockdown. One side screaming that the governments are fascist powermongers, hell-bent on control for its own sake. The other side screaming that every lockdown sentiment is callous or clueless. Both misguided. Both fueled by media clickbait. The first difficult step to thinking is to stop arguing, to fight the natural inclination to fixate on what is disagreeable to you in another person's point of view. We require the cultivation of more useful habits, which do not make every exchange an opportunity to pounce on another's misstep and double down on your own sense of moral or intellectual superiority. One of the nice things about critical thinking is that lots of people who did good in school don't get to be good at this. They were good in school because they hit the jackpot with an eidetic memory in a world of learning by rote. But some such people are deplorably bad at actually thinking. And being good at sums just won't help us. That is because the kind of intelligence that measures IQ doesn't make a good critical thinker. Your high IQ can't save you from yourself. In fact, the higher your intelligence as measured by IQ, the more adept you will be at rationalizing the world in a way that makes it conform to your preconceived ideas. More intelligent people, IQ-wise, will find more creative ways to fall prey to confirmation bias. Like the cleverest lawyer in the world, they always win. But they do not think to seek the truth or to do the right thing. If critical thinking begins with letting go of our preconceived ideas, by opening our worldview up to the perspectives of others, of people who see things differently, then IQ is not as important a tool as EQ, or emotional intelligence. We need to empathize with others as a first step if we are to see the world from their point of view. And so with critical thinking, It is often more important to be kind than to be clever. In our brave new COVID world, where do we look for the people who cannot empathise with others? Are they pro-lockdown or anti-lockdown? They are, of course, both. It doesn't matter the room, they're always the ones with their backs against the wall. Against any wall. Some of these people will share beliefs with critical thinkers who have actually earned them. They will sometimes stand closer to the truth than their mortal enemies, because the truth will sometimes be on their side of the room. But truth never has its back against the wall. Some of the most intelligent people in the world are debarred from truth because they cannot reduce themselves to the points of view of people they deem stupid. They are smart enough to win every argument, but you cannot argue your way to truth. You can only empathize your way to truth. Because truth happens in between our varying vantage points. As much as we would all like to possess it, alas, we don't get to possess it. We can triangulate the approximate location of truth by engaging others to show us what truth has in common with many points of view. Critical thinking and the quest for truth requires us to be a particular kind of person. I quite like David Manley's list of fundamentals: curious, thorough, and open. They are simple, but they work. We must ask questions. Strive for something of Einstein's self-diagnosis, that is to say, be passionately curious. Most of us by early adulthood have lost the natural philosophical why. Education rewarded us for remembering dates, for spitting back out whatever they shoved in. We were not taught to ask questions, but to answer them, and never to loosen our claims to ownership on truth, but we should ask questions, and questions of ourselves. A bulletproof theory is not a good theory. The good theory is the one that allows itself to be shot at, and yet survives to tell the tale, that actively engages with the possibility that it is incorrect, that seeks out the tests and the evidence that will disconfirm it. The danger is of becoming emotionally attached to one's position, to a particular belief system, in which case a debate becomes more a defense of oneself. We need to decouple. Decoupling is detaching from your beliefs so they can be revised in light of new and contradictory evidence. Failing to decouple leads us back into the void of either or. But a discussion is not a battle where one side is ultimately victorious. Rather, our beliefs should exist on a spectrum of varying degrees of confidence. The aim is to hold accurate beliefs. This is not the same as holding correct beliefs. Accurate beliefs are not beliefs that are 100% correct, but beliefs we have the right degree of confidence in, given the available evidence. Consider hydroxychloroquine. Does it help treat COVID-19? With new evidence, we first want to ask if it is even relevant to my hypothesis. Hypothesis H, hydroxy helps in the treatment of COVID-19. When the US President tells me that hydroxychloroquine is a game changer, that is not evidence that it is. We ought to question the medical advice of someone who is not a medical professional, and especially one who suggests that we inject bleach into ourselves. Trusting more trustworthy people with a good track record, is fine. Let them push you 2% further up the continuum of confidence, or 20%, but don't blindly inherit their truths either. Trump's tweets don't count as much as University of Oxford clinical trials. On the other hand, just because Trump says it, that doesn't mean it's wrong. When you reject hypotheses outright for their being uttered by particular humans, your opinions become easier to control. And we might question medical professionals too. We have to where medical professionals are giving opposing advice. When we see a claim that hydroxy treatment was effective on 699 patients, we might ask for the source. Always ask for the source. I think this claim is accurate and was made by a New York doctor. We might next ask, what is effective? In this case, the metric for effectiveness was not dying. And this would be remarkable if we take the COVID mortality rate, according to some wild early estimates, at 25%. We would then expect 175 deaths. But if we accept recent claims of a 0.6% COVID mortality rate, we might only expect 4 deaths out of 700 anyway. And given that the doctor is working with patients visiting his clinic as opposed to patients in a hospital A&E or too sick to leave their rooms, 0 deaths out of 700 does not seem so unusual. 0 deaths out of 700 cases at a walk-in clinic is about what I would expect if I were to treat the patients with Cocoa Pops. And if that is surprising, your fear has perhaps led you astray, with some help from the media. We do need to be careful with statistics. Ideally, of course, we would base opinions about effectiveness of medicines on clinical trials, but even then we need to be clear precisely what is being tested. The World Health Organization halted trials in hydroxy after trials in Britain and France showed no effect on the mortality rate of hospitalized patients. Note that this does not tell us whether early use of hydroxy could stop patients needing to go to hospital in the first place. The tendency is again to sway for or against. Hydroxy is a game changer or it's useless. Trump is right or he's wrong. But the death rates of COVID have dropped dramatically as the medical professions have discovered how to treat it better. Different doctors using different cocktails, different steroids that work somewhat. This is what statistical evidence shows. Hydroxy might be part of those cocktails. So again, allow yourself degrees of confidence. If you often say words like maybe, likely, it is more probable that, or one possibility is, then you are on the right track. If you don't preface your hypothesis with such stipulations, then you haven't begun to track down truth. Or to think again on statistics, we might ask, what is the mortality rate of COVID-19? It is easy to say it could kill 20 to 50 million people, as many as the Spanish flu, and it could, but that is firstly a fear response, not a reasoned response. Given over 300,000 different presumed viruses of mammals, jumping straight to the worst one is like fearing you will die of a shark attack. Yes, Jaws was scary, but sharks don't usually eat people. But today, given 1 million deaths already, assuming we accept that number, it may be a reasonable claim. But it would still need to be based on mortality rate, transmissibility, population, and perhaps 20 other factors known to epidemiologists. I have seen mortality rates listed between 25% and 0.01%. Best estimates now may be somewhere around 0.6% and on an overall downward trajectory. It has changed over time, as it should in light of new evidence, but just a little critical thinking should have deduced that even more conservative early estimates of a 3 to 5% mortality rate were wildly off target. Given limited testing capabilities, such tests were initially confined primarily to critical patients being carted in hospital doors. This is a glaring example of a selection effect. Your sample is unrepresentative of the population. As though you were to double the size of your fishing net and panic that there are no more small fish in the sea. There are lots of small fish in the sea. Your net just doesn't catch those fish. And the same onlookers who spent March arguing why the 5% estimates are accurate will spend November arguing why the 0.6% estimates are accurate, when they ought to have learned to ask questions by now and seek out selection effects. Defer to expertise, certainly, but you don't always have to be an expert in a field to see the more obvious errors of reasoning be made by some members of that field. Again, we are all mammals, and none of us immune from the mistakes that mammals make. At times of fear and high emotion, humans degenerate from debate to argument, and from argument to personal attacks, to violence. But these are precisely the times we need to transcend debate, the goal of which is to be right, and elevate our game to dialectic, the goal of which is truth. And if our amygdalas and arched backs were not enough to hold us back from dialectic, we have the personalised media stream, filling our heads with reruns of the same old clickbait we never should have clicked on the first time. One person's stream diametrically opposed to the next, pushing us ever further apart. Precisely when you need to take your time, media will force you into System 1 processes, will shut down your System 2 ability to reason and weigh evidence through an appeal to your System 1 emotion or desire. Media moguls know how to capitalize on our systematic errors of thinking, on primitive, automative brain functions that have already jumped to conclusions before our rational System 2 brain has a chance to even ask for the evidence for or against any given hypothesis. An early newsline analysis of media streams respecting COVID-19 claimed that the WHO and the US Centre of Disease Control received 54,000 social media clicks, where various red-rated sources, highly unreliable media outlets, often just individuals, received 52 million. In the UK, the NHS has been receiving 1,000 times less than red-rated news sources of US origin. The responsibility should be on the public to check what news they are spreading. But critical thinking takes time, and we don't have time. We have emotional attachment to our ideas, and a need for the immediate gratification of showing the world we were right. The popularity of social media has exacerbated our God-given lack of critical awareness. Not only are we hardwired to find confirmation of our own beliefs, now our computers are hardwired to give it to us. It is a match made in hell. Crisis informatics is the study of how information flows during crisis events, especially how information flows across what we call technology-mediated events, the internet and social media. Humans behave in predictable ways during times like this. We get scared and confused because our very powers of induction, by which we infer future events and causalities from past ones, have been pulled from under us. Most of us in the Western world have never experienced a present like this. Things have never looked so unlike the past. We react to this loss of control with an attempt to retake control. That is just how minds work. It evidences itself in various ways. A simplification of the complexities of the crisis. We become expert epidemiologists in a week, so as we can explain away our crisis in a sentence, so as to make sense again of our mad new worlds. We often find someone to blame for the crisis, blame the Chinese, blame someone in power, the government perhaps. Others will instead blame the people who are blaming the government, entirely unaware that they are still playing out the crisis informatics template. It is easy to see how this need to understand, control, and take back power extends into a wealth of new conspiracy theories at crisis times. Events we can't control are often attributed to an overarching plot by multiple omnipresent and omnipotent actors working together for some secret goal such as population control or unlimited power. People who believe in one conspiracy theory are likely to believe in another. They actually score higher in certain forms of thinking. Intuitive thinking, for example, thinking with your gut. Intuitive thinkers are good at acquiring experiential knowledge of how people or the world works. But intuition stands in opposition to critical thinking. Conspiracy theorists have lower analytic thinking on average, don't typically excel with facts and statistics, have lower levels of education too, and despite their flawed sense that the people they can't get woke need to just open their minds, conspiracy theorists score quite low in tests of open-mindedness. They are rarely open-minded in the idea that a conspiracy theory might be wrong, for example. They are backs to the wall, never venturing to another's perspective to try and triangulate truth. The increase in conspiracy theories is exacerbated by the fact that people tend to click on shocking things. Please don't. Your computer has a memory, and if it thinks you like conspiracy theories, it has plenty more to give you. They will feed you so many highly disagreeable things that you will become highly disagreeable. Most humans are disagreeable. You may, for example, look at the comments on a 1-hour YouTube video on some particular topic and note several individuals commenting with their disagreements with some singular point made after perhaps 28 minutes and 13 seconds. But no one watches a 1-hour video and comments on the only sentence that they actually liked. Conspiracy theorists are especially disagreeable. Their theories typically don't weigh evidence, and you won't find much of value there. They will not teach you how to think. Soon you yourself will live in a world where everyone is a member of QAnon, a far-right group who believes that Trump is here to save us from a Hollywood elite of pedophiles who are making drugs from the blood of children, perhaps for Satan himself. Your world will be awash with confused souls who think COVID-19 is caused by 5G telecommunications masts, or that there is no COVID-19. It's not a pandemic, but a plandemic. Looking at these false hypotheses generates money for the people who concoct them, and whether they are just that incapable of critical thinking or unscrupulous marketing geniuses, you are helping them to capitalize on lonely, isolated people's need to feel important and part of the club. You are also filling your old world with straw men, extreme examples of the points of view you don't share. This in turn hinders your ability to step into the middle of the room where real thinking happens. For even with conspiracy theories, we might remember they often contain a grain of truth. Amidst the long list of bizarre conspiracies associated with COVID-19, for example, there is the idea that it is a man-made virus, that it began in a lab, it is a bioweapon. This conspiracy is of a different nature than the supposition that Donald Trump is battling Satan for the souls of man. This one could, at least in theory, be true. Governments do make bioweapons. There are not many places in the world where they could be made. One of the most likely is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, less than 10 miles from the first epicenter of the virus. This is not proof, but it is evidence that would shift one's degree of confidence in Hypothesis H. COVID-19 is a man-made bioweapon. Many scientists feel that the virus evidences laboratory enhancement, elements that appear complete in themselves, more likely spliced than naturally mutated, which is not to say they may not have mutated. I, for one, believe reports I've read about the adaptability of this virus to human transmission being conspicuous and suggestive of a human-enhanced capacity. Although the lab leak hypothesis is cast as a conspiracy theory equivalent to claiming that Elvis is still alive, it seems a likely origin, not the only one. Many people might have you locked up for thinking that, but it's okay to disagree with people. so long as you have objectively considered the evidence to the best of your ability. I'm not saying that crazy people don't think it came from a lab too, and think this for all manner of crazy reasons. But your job is to be assured that your own reasons are sound. Conspiracy theories won't help us determine if we should lock down our country. Looking at how lockdowns have worked in other countries should. Countries with more severe lockdowns, such as New Zealand, even Thailand and Taiwan, are doing well with respect to COVID-19 deaths. One would need to weigh this against future economic effects. I don't mean only in terms of money, but in terms of human life. In Ireland, we can consider cancelled cancer screenings, mental health problems, suicides. We need to factor these people into any decision and not create a situation where you are luckier to be in danger of dying because of a coronavirus than of a cancer, because that way at least you will be treated. In sub-Saharan Africa, the predictions for additional loss of life due to malaria in a lockdown was actually higher than the predictions for loss of life due to COVID-19 without a lockdown. So it is by no means self-evident that a lockdown will have the best possible results in every country in the long term. The sort of deaths we have seen with COVID are the sort of deaths we've seen routinely for decades with malaria in small regions of the world. This matters more because the people dying, at least some of them, are rich Westerners. What does seem evident is that if one is to lock down, one needs to go all in. A very strict 6-week lockdown is surely preferable to a year or two of half measures. The long-term damage to economy would be minimised this way. But Ireland's present approach of taking rights from citizens on the one hand, but opening your airports to tourism on the other, is neither here nor there and doesn't seem conducive to success. And if one were to enter an even stricter lockdown, we will then have further questions. How could we police that? Tear gas maybe? Spraying citizens with bleach? Imprisonment? Should our military be told they can shoot to kill, as in the Philippines? We can also take the contrary approach, Sweden's relatively unrestricted response. But we ought to ask whether our tactics working in Sweden, where people tend to do what they are told, will work in Ireland, where people don't. 800 years of being a rebel is hard to shake off. But again, all such generalizations are dangerous. The very question, are you pro or anti-lockdown, already evidences a failure to critically engage, to recognise degrees of confidence. In Ireland, for example, we have 5 levels of lockdown. So can't one be pro-level 2, but anti-level 3 just now, and still open to being pro-level 5 next week, depending on what new evidence is presented to them in the interim? Of course they can, or at least they should be. And of course the decision to draft up 5 levels is somewhat arbitrary. One can envision a finer gradient of lockdown, say 100 levels, beginning with level 1, which stipulates only that you must not leave your house, specifically to sneeze in other people's faces whilst in the final throes of death caused by COVID-19. We don't really need that level, right? Surely that much goes without saying. We wouldn't really need level 100 either, total lockdown. No one can go outside for any reason, and so no food can be delivered either. No one would agree to that. It would certainly do more harm than good. It is not a useful level. But placing oneself on the continuum, somewhere between these two extremes, would be a useful exercise. It would force people to think, to realise that they are not so certain of their own positions as they think, that reality does not easily conform to the order we are predetermined to place in it. Some ways to prevent and slow down transmission are washing your hands, or using an alcohol-based rub, frequently not touching your face. Wear a mask or sneeze into your arm. As it is a virus, having a strong immune system is an effective preventative measure. You should therefore be sure to eat good food, sleep a lot, and try not to stress. Take vitamins B, C, D, cut down on sugar. Be aware that you might take vitamin C and still die from respiratory failure caused by coronavirus disease, but the stronger your immunity, the greater your chances of not contracting or dying due to exposure to viruses. So take vitamin C, eat a cucumber, build your immunity, turn off the TV, stop clicking on conspiracy theories, whether to agree with them or to disagree with them. Protect your own mental health. Keep in touch with lonely people. And don't let your fear or your personal vantage point or your particular media stream stop you from knowing how to think. We all inherit falsehoods and get things wrong. There isn't a thing we can think of, but more informed people think the opposite. More compassionate people too. And sometimes they are right. Some doctors and nurses I know think a lockdown is the right thing. Some counsellors I know think it's not. That all stands to reason, and they are all eminently reasonable people. Don't be lured into the pervasive error of equating anti-lockdown with callousness or cluelessness. That is a nonsense. And should the received wisdom swing to conceiving of an unimaginably strict but brief lockdown as itself callous or clueless, that will be nonsense too. People incapable of critical thinking attach themselves to every idea. That in itself does not detract from those ideas. Do not get lost in arguing for argument's sake, and do not get lost in statistics. Keep your eyes fixed on compassion. Jesus was right, and caring was around long before COVID-19. It's a much bigger kind of a thing.